Shakespeare's Four Tragedies. Coordinates of the Shifting Standards. Episode 1. Hamlet, the Loss of Self-Standard. The time is out of joint. Spoken in Act 1, Scene 5, Hamlet laments the world's misalignment after hearing the truth of his father's murder from the ghost. The moment Hamlet perceives the world as misaligned, he fails to establish a self-standard to correct it. Although called to set the twisted times right, he chooses an endless maze of thought instead of a law for action. Thought without a standard fails to process external shocks and merely spins internally, delaying all vital resolutions. At this point, the tragedy shifts, from a case of revenge to the ruin of a self drifting without a standard. Hamlet's gaze, lacking a self-standard, begins to erupt as cruel violence toward those closest to him. He erases the existence of his lover, Ophelia, reducing her to a tool for his feigned madness to absolutize his own agony. To one who has lost their standard, the pain of others is no longer a consideration. Only one's bloated thought remains true. Eventually, his wandering results in the most innocent victim, Ophelia, and rushes toward an irreversible catastrophe. Because there is no standard for action, perfect opportunities only offer him moral paralysis and hesitation. Even when facing his uncle at prayer, he withdraws his sword, citing the conceptual logic that killing him now sends him to heaven. This is not prudence, but a refusal of action disguised as thought, delayed revenge that misses the golden time foretells. Not justice, but a disorderly procession of needless death. The final chapter concludes with an impulsive execution pushed by circumstances, rather than a man of standards. Hamlet executes a visceral revenge only after falling into a trap set by his enemy, not a justice he designed himself. In a shambles where his mother and comrades are already dying of poison, his blade restores no actual order. The grand thoughts of correcting a twisted era eventually become a hollow epitaph erected over the corpses of all. Episode 2. Othello, the Dissolution of the Standard of Trust. Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. Spoken in Act 3, Scene 3, the villain Iago plants seeds of doubt in Othello's heart through a paradoxical warning. The moment doubt enters as a warning, Othello begins to dissolve his own standard of trust instead of guarding it. The certainty built on the battlefield collapses before Iago's sophisticated language, losing the yardstick for verifying the people he loves. He chooses the fatal error of trusting virtual frames, designed by an enemy more than the physical truth of his wife. In this instant, Othello's world shifts from a cosmos ruled by trust to a chaos ruled by suspicion. Suspicion that has lost its standards soon degenerates into mad obsession, distorting every peaceful daily routine. Othello exposes himself to cognitive gaslighting, attempting to find evidence of infidelity even in Desdemona's most devoted actions. Since the standard to judge what is worth believing is absent, a single handkerchief is elevated to absolute proof of betrayal. To one who has handed over the standard of trust to the outside, truth no longer exerts any power. Othello's tragedy occurs because he lacked a personal filter for how to believe in others. Not just from low self-esteem, he becomes engrossed in gaining a false certainty to appease his own anxiety, rather than protecting the most noble truth. As the standard for proving love shifts from the existence of the other to one's own doubt, the relationship is destroyed. The tragedy now runs toward the extreme conclusion of murder, on the acceleration of an unstoppable and blind jealousy. Finally, he makes the irreversible choice of murdering heaven with his own hands and becoming the master of hell. Othello killing his wife in the bedroom was not justice, but a cowardly violence committed by a man who lost his standard. The moment Desdemona's final breath stops, the standards of honor and love Othello tried to protect also vanished forever. The truth revealed too late returns not as salvation, but as a horrific settlement for the one who abandoned trust. Episode 3. King Lear. The transactionalization of the standard of love. Nothing will come of nothing. Spoken in Act 1, Scene 1. Lear refuses to divide territory when his daughter Cordelia chooses sincere silence over flowery flattery. The moment King Lear demands love as an output, he begins his downfall by reducing existence to a mere transaction. He believed heart could be measured by words and turned relationships into transactions. At this point, where he tried to prove invisible values with visible numbers, the engine of his tragedy is ignited. The arrogance of the king, who bet his entire fortune on a hollow flattery, already contains his total and inevitable ruin. The price of setting the wrong standard appears as a horrific dehumanization once the shield of power disappears. The love as transaction established by Lear is passed on to his daughters, leading them to treat him as trash. Since the transaction began with the false currency of flattery, the only reward for a king whose resources are gone is contempt. He trips over the harsh standard he created and finds himself a miserable beggar, driven out into the wilderness. In the storm-swept wilderness, Lear finally faces the essential standard of being a naked man without any ornaments. Where the decorations of crowns were stripped away, what remained was his own impoverished soul that viewed love as a trade. He painfully learns before the massive power of nature how powerless social status is as a human standard. In his madness, he realizes that his words that nothing comes from nothingness were a judgment, directed at his own life. The peak of the tragedy is reached in the belated awakening that comes only after losing his most truthful standard, Cordelia. Clutching the corpse of his daughter, Lear finally witnesses that true love resided in the very silence he once rejected. He only faces the value of life, which could never be bought with transactional standards, after losing every single thing. The geometry of time has already passed the point of no return, presenting the final bill that stops his heart. Episode 4. Macbeth. The absolutization of the standard of desire. I have no spur but only vaulting ambition. Spoken in Act 1, Scene 7, Macbeth confesses that the only force driving his actions is ambition, not any legitimate or moral cause. The moment Macbeth realizes his motivation is only desire, he discards the standards of good and evil to make desire his sole order. Knowing he has no legitimate spur, he decides to leap over the threshold of humanity toward the goal of the throne. As the reference point shifts from moral legitimacy to personal achievement, he becomes a monster stepping on the accelerator of ruin. This moment of realization is the irreversible turning point that transforms a loyal general into a bloody usurper. In a world where standards are replaced by desire, Macbeth follows the law of value inversion. Fair is foul and foul is fair. He murdered his king and gained the crown. But a result with a destroyed process never allows him a moment's rest. Achievement with desire as the standard demands constant anxiety and more murders, pushing him into a cycle of blood. By seizing the crown, he loses the very peace and sleep needed to survive. Macbeth's tragedy occurs because he erased the inner resistance line to stop the acceleration of his own dark desires. He used external temptations like prophecies as an indulgence for his actions, and evaded responsibility by calling it fate. In a life where desire is the standard, the lives of others are reduced to consumables to maintain one's precarious position. His soul rapidly withers as much as the blood he shed, losing the very meaning of his existence. At the peak of catastrophe, Macbeth realizes that the ambition he held as his only standard was a mere mockery. The moving forest and the man not born of woman show how powerless, arrogant human standards are before nature. He raced toward the destination, burning everything, but arrived at an abyss of futility, where all meaning had completely evaporated. Life becomes a shadow scattering without context or standard, like a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing.